Okay, good evening. I hope you're all well. Today we're learning Maseches Chullin Daf Kuf Beis and continuing our discussions about the scope and applicability of the Isser of Aver Min HaChai. Says the Gemara on the bottom of Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, 6 lines from the bottom of the page, Tanu Rabbanon. Aver Min HaChai Noeg Bebehema Chai Va'of. The applicability of the Isser of Aver Min HaChai applies to domesticated animals, wild animals, and birds, all three. I would never have had a Havamina that it was otherwise. Whatever the scenario is, I wouldn't have made a distinction, right? But I wouldn't have made a distinction. And vein tmeinu vein tehorim. We also don't care if it's a kosher animal. The Isser of Aver Min HaChai applies both to animals that are tahor and tameh. So it'll apply on the bird level to a chicken and to an ostrich, to a wolf and to a goat and to a cow and to a camel. It'll apply to all of the different genres. Divri Rabbi Yehuda of Rebbe Lazar. Not so surprising to see Rabbi Yehuda hold this way because we already know from him of Isser Chalal Isser. So you can have Ever Min HaChai stacked on top of an animal that's tameh. So all that is Rabbi Yehuda of Rebbe Lazar. And the Brisa continues, V'chachamim omrim, eino noheg ele b'tehorin. I'm not disagreeing on the vastness of animals, of behema, chaya, and ofa. That's fine. What I do disagree with, however, is whether or not it applies to tmein. And the Chachamim hold that no, the Isser of Ever Min HaChai only applies to animals that are edible in the first place. Why is this the case in regards to both of them? What's driving the Shita on the one side of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lazar, and the Shita on the other of the Chachamim? So the bottom 2 lines of Kuf Aleph Amud Beis begins to paint the picture for us. Amar Rabbi Yochanan v'shnehem mikra echad darshu. Both, again, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lazar on the one side and the Chachamim on the other, they're both using the same exact pasuk. We have a pasuk from Sefer Dvarim Yud Beis. Rak chazak levilti achol hadam. Be strong, don't drink blood. Ki adam hu hanofesh. Blood is the soul. Turning to the top of the next page, and it should say vi lo sochal hanefesh im basar, and do not eat the nefesh with the basar. And here, based on the understanding of this pasuk, is where we see a divergence in the Tanaim from the Brisa. On the top of Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yehuda of Rebbe Lazar Savrei. Let's remember what their shita was. They held broadly that the Isser of Ever Min HaChai applied to Behema Chai Va'of, Bein Tmei and Bein Tahor. So they held Savrei Kol She'ata Mitzuva Al Damo. Any animal where there's an Isser for you to consume the blood of that animal, which is every animal, therefore Ata Mitzuva Al Evarov. So Vahani Tmei and Nami, even animals that are Tamei, guess what? Ho v'atametzuva al daman, atametzuva al evaron. Should be evaron, not evarin. That's the correction over here on the side from the kisvei yad. And that is the approach of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lazar. The way they learn up the pasuk is that there's a link between the Isser of Achilas Dam and the Isser of Ever Min HaChai. Wherever one applies, the other applies. However, says the Gemara, the Rabbanon Sabre, the Chachamim of our Mishnah, of our Brisa, from the bottom of Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, the Rabbanon, who are of the opinion that Ever Min HaChai only applies by an animal that's tahor. Why do they hold that way? Sabre, lo sochal hanefesh im basar ela basar lechudei, meaning that the animal has to be a basar that you're allowed to eat. He's playing off the words of the pasuk. Look at the words. Lo sochal hanefesh im habasar. Don't eat the blood with the flesh. Now, when is the only time that that sentence is applicable? Therefore, says the Gemara, Kol shebsaro mutter atamitzuva al evarav. When the basar of the animal is mutter, that's when the Torah tells you you're not allowed to have blood. Therefore, that's the only time we have a din of Ever Min HaChai. V'chol she'ein bsaro mutter, but if you have an animal where there is no heter to eat the basar, namely an animal that's already tamei out of the gates, therefore, i'ata mitzuva al evarav. So this is the machlokes tanaim. One side holds that the Isser of Ever Min HaChai applies everywhere because it's connected to the Isser of Achilas Dam, And since the Isra of Achilas Dam applies both by Behema Chaya and Oaf and by animals which are Tameh and Tahor, so therefore you're also going to have Eber Min Achai in those cases. The Chachamim argue the dissenting opinion, and they hold no, it's not tied to Achilas Dam, it's tied to the Achilas Basar based on the syntax of the Pasuk, and therefore only animals that are edible to you out of the gates are the ones that will have a din of Eber Min Achai, and that therefore limits it to animals that are Tahor. Now, the Gemara is bothered, I hinted to this a little bit, the Gemara is bothered a little bit by the inclusion of Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara about 8 lines down on Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yehuda, Lama Lekra. I don't understand. We just learned from Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yehuda learned from the pasuk about Levilti Echol Hadam. Why do we need a pasuk from him? Leisi Iser Aver, Lechol Al Iser Tuma, Shekain Noheg Isuro, Shekain Isuro Noheg Bivnei Noach. We know that the Isser of Aver Minachai has very strong roots, and as we saw, at least according to some Shitas over the previous many days, that the uniqueness of the Isra of Ever Minachai is that it's long-standing. It even precedes the giving of the Torah. There are very few mitzvahs like that, but this is one of them. So therefore, the Gemara says, I don't understand why we need a pasuk. We already know that Rabbi Yehuda is willing to include the Isra Chal al Isra model when it comes to Ever Minachai, because Shekain Yisro Noeg Bivnei Noach. I don't need a pasuk to teach me that. That should be ABCs for Rabbi Yehuda's Shita. So the Gemara responds, I don't disagree with you. Inachanami, you're 100% correct. Why then did we need the pasuk? Not for Rabbi Yehuda. V'chi isrich kra was only Rebbe Lazar. And the Gemara brings a raya for this approach, that the need for the pasuk to indicate that the isr of Ever Minachai applies broadly to chaya, to behema chaya va'of, bein tamei and bein tahorin, that it's only for Rebbe Lazar. And what we need to look at in this brisa that we're about to see is what is omitted. Tanya nami hachi. Ever minachai noeg bebehema chayev va'of bein tmei bein tahora shenemar rak chazak levilti echol hadam. This is exactly what we saw, not the exact wording, but very close to it. Same principle, that the Isra of Ever Minachai applies across all animals, tameh or otherwise, based on the pasuk that speaks about dam. Any animal where you're not allowed to eat its blood, by definition, you're not allowed to eat an Ever Minachai. Divrei, whose name should have we expected here? We should have expected 2 names in this brisa, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lazar. Who instead do we see? Divrei Rabbi Lazar. The omission of Rabbi Yehuda reminds us that really this pasuk isn't for Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is in the same camp as Rabbi Lazar, but what drives Rabbi Yehuda is something different. What drives Rabbi Yehuda is that Isser Chal al Isser applies with Ever Minachai, Shekain Isuro Noeg Bivnei Noach, as we've seen a couple of times. So that's what the Gemara says over here. Based on the Brisa, we therefore see the pasuk really wasn't needed for Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lazar agree with one another. They're bedfellows, but at the end of the day, they don't need one another in regards to the pasuk, because Rabbi Yehuda would have been fine without it. So the Brisa is going to continue, even though we already have the text proof that we need. V'chachamim omrim, I disagree. Eino noheg el b'tahor. Shene'emar lo sochal hanefesh im habasar ela basar lechudei kol shebsar mutar tamatzuva alevara kol she'em sar mutar ein tamatzuva alevara. So this is just a brisa that repeats for us the 2 shitas, the one camp Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lazar that Ever Minachai applies super broadly, and the sheet of the Chachamim that it applies narrowly. What we have yet to see is the most limited shita of them all. And this brisa adds it, which our Mishnah didn't, which is shocking. And this sometimes raises a structural question of how Mishnayos were built. Why is it that the Mishnah, the brisa that we saw at the bottom of Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, only included the 2 camps of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lazar on the one side, Chachamim on the other? Now we're going to see a new sheet of Rabbi Meir. Why wasn't it included over here? Maybe we didn't have it at that time. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi didn't know about it. Is that even a possibility? That's hard to believe. One way or the other, we see a new sheet here. We're about halfway down on Kuf Beis and Aleph. Let's learn the new shita of applicability of Ever Minachai, the most limited one yet. Rav Meir Omer, Eino Noeg Ela Bebehema Tehora Bilvad. Now, according to the first approach that we saw, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar, there are 6 groups of animals that there's Ever Min HaChai. Behema, Tmeya, Behema Tahora. Chaya, Tahora. Did I say it right? Behema Tmeya Tahora, 2. Chaya Tmeya Tahora, 4. Of Tmeya Tahora, 6. Then we dropped that list down to 3 when we got to the Chachamim because he held that it didn't apply by animals that were tamei. So behema chayav of tahor. And now we've dropped it down to 1. There's only one animal to which there is an isser of ever min achai, and that is a behema tahora bilvad. Look at the siman over here, siman Shmuel Shila Shimi. What we're going to see over here is just some confusion as to who the author is of the following memra. Amar Rabba bar Shmuel, that's the Shmuel of the siman. Amar of Chizah v'itemer of Yosef. That's version 1, which had 2 options, right? Version 2, v'amar Amar Rabba bar Shila, which was the second name in the mnemonic. Amar of Chizah v'itemer of Yosef. V'amar Rabba bar Shimi or Simi. Amar of Chizah v'itemer of Yosef. We don't know who said it, but Lamaisa, my time of the Rav Meir. This exceedingly limited shita of Rav Meir that says that Ever Min HaChai only applies by a behema that is tahora, mehechatesi. How do we know that Rav Meir holds this way? Why would Rav Meir hold this way? Omar Kra, v'zavachta mibkaracha umitzoncha. It's only these kinds of domesticated animals, and that's it. And the fact that it's from the pasuk that it is part of, which is the pasuk that teaches us that we're allowed to do shechita, by definition, those animals must be tahor. Look at the pasuk on the side, a famed pasuk of Dvarim Yud Beis. Ki yirchak mimcha makom sheyivcha Hashem Elokecha lasum shemo sham. Let's say, as we are now in a time when we are, where we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, so how can we Jews who are from, how can we eat a korban? Says the Gemara, v'zavachta mi b'karacha u'mitzoncha. All you have to do is shecht your domesticated animals, no problem. So therefore, from here, Rav Meir says that is where we learn the scope of Ever Min HaChai. So these are our 3 shitas in the Tanaim. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar hold that Ever Min HaChai applies by Behema Chayav and Of, Tamei and Tahor, 6 groupings. According to the Chachamim, it only applies to 3 groupings, Behema Chayav Of, but only that which is Tahor. And Rav Meir is of the opinion that it only applies to 1 animal, which is a Behema Tahor. Now, this is our 3-way machlokas. However, the 3-way machlokas doesn't apply across the boards. There are limits to the machlokas. So it says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down on Kuf Beis Amar Aleph. Amar of Gidel Amar Rav, machlokas is only be Yisrael with a yid. Now let's remember that the Isser of Ever Min HaChai applies to a goy also. Aval beben Noach, when it comes to a Noahide, when it comes to a Stam Goy, someone who's not a Yid, so Divrei Akol Muzhar al Hatmein Kitahorin. When it comes to a Ben Noach, there is no distinction. Their Isser is broader than the Isser of a Yid. I mean, the truth is that's only true according to 2 of our Tanaim, because according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda, they anyways hold that all animals have the applicability of the Isser. But according to the other 2 Tanaim, which is the Shita of the Chachamim and the Shita of Rav Meir, the Goyim, the Bnei Noach, have more Isser than the Yid. There are times in Shas that this would be followed by Umi Ika Midi, Dil Yisrael Chayev, we don't see that question here, but would be a valid question under the circumstances. So that's what the Gemara says over here about.
Sure. Still not mutter because it's a treif animal. The question, as you just phrased it, is the answer to why it's not right.
Why?
It's not sharp. More often asked, is there something that for a guy is also, but for a Jew is mutter? Plus, everyone has not mutter from a treif animal because it's still a treif animal. Just you don't get the extra punishment. That's probably why I didn't ask. Otherwise, it's.
Yeah, but according to the shitas that hold that there's Isser Chalal Isser, you could have had a different Isser, which you don't have.
It's not sharp. You can't use the word sharp.
So the only thing, you're right, the only thing I could push back on is within Rav Meir. Because within Rav Meir, we would say that a Chaya and Of, which are Tahor, don't have an Isser of Ever Min HaChai. But then again, the whole point of Rav Gidol Amarab's comment is limiting the machlokas. So that means that that's correct. What I'm saying is that according to Rav Gidol Amarab, by Rav Meir, this would be true, Taka. By Rav Meir, would be true. According to your approach, that I hear that. Anyways, the Gemara doesn't ask it. In fact, the Gemara doubles down, Tanya Nami Hachi, and brings a proof. Ever minachai, ben Noach muzhar alov al hatmein kitahorin. There's no difference between them. Yisrael eno muzhar ella al hatahorin bilvad. This shmeks already. This doesn't fit with everybody. Who is the one who holds tahorin? Well, that's not so easy. We have the shita of the Chachamim, who hold that there are three groups. Behema chayav of tahorin, and we also have Rav Meir, who also is tahorin. So then look at this: Ika de amri tahora in the singular, Rav Meir, referring to behema. In Ika de amri tahorim v'rabbanon plural, which would be the rabbanon, because they held that there were three groups of animals. About 12 years ago, I was asked to do a bris right by Zidichov, like 60 some odd hundred block of Troy, right there. A Goyish family, they were Bnei Noach. They were from Bnei Noach. When I walked into their house, there was a Chabadsker Rav there, Chabadnik. So I pulled him over. I'm like, what? I know why I'm here. I like Stamagoy, like I know why are you here? He said the Lubavitcher Rebbe held that because a goy has 7 mitzvos, there's a din of kiruv to make sure that they do their 7 mitzvos, and the obligation is on the yidden to do that. I hear. I'd never seen that in writing. I don't think I've still seen it in writing, but I couldn't believe it. I don't know. That's fascinating. There's no mitzvah bris milah. We didn't make a bracha. Nothing. No, nothing. Flat line. Nothing. Like no. It's not one of the 7. It's not one of the 7. But it was definitely very interesting. And there are people. We would refer to this ger toshav, like that. There's different models in halacha about this. Yeah. It's not prominent. It's definitely not prominent. But I will say that it's rare that communities live without courts. There's Seder HaDvarim. There is. Let's go through them. Ever Menachai. It's no applicability to the Maisa. People can't, only if they have animals on their backyard, right? Ever Menachai. Birkas Hashem is a problem. You're probably going to have blasphemers. You'll probably have that. Gezel's a problem. So the Gemara says, "Miut ba'araus v'rubam gezel v'chulam ba'avak lashon hara." That's not good. Let's say Gila Raus is a problem. Din, Hereg is okay. Most people don't murder. Yeah, most people don't do Gila Raus either. I guess it depends what you define by murder. Is it actually Ashes Ish? What's the scope of them? I think the Gemara in Sanhedrin was that was where a lot of the conversations were, but I don't remember the nuances around Gila Raus. Also, that Gemara in Sanhedrin that spoke about this, there was some like flowering of and really it's 30 and really it's 60 and it's 9. They remember the Gemaras that really fun, greatly expanded. And the Gemara we saw a couple days ago that there were 30 mitzvos. B'nai Noach. Am I remembering correctly? It's something on the bottom. Here it is. Yeah. It's on the bottom of Tzadi Beis and Aleph. Amar lo shloshim mitzvos shekibul lehem b'nai Noach. Yeah, so there are different shitas. Yeah. Okay, very good. Let's continue. So the Gemara says, Omar of Shezvi, Afana Nami Tanina. This is not a new idea. We have learned this before. This is a Mishnah in Taros. I have a pencil.
I remember where something was last night.
Okay, I have one in my stender. Well, on the bottom of Tzadi Beis?
It's actually
it's close enough. Yeah. Happy to pretend help.
Same suit. Thank you.
Says the Gemara, Afon Anami Tani, 10 lines from the bottom. Ochal Ever Minachai Mimena. This was referring to a unique case. We're out of context. It was referring to a non-kosher bird. So let's say we're eating a bat. Well, that's probably a bad idea to give that as an example. Let's use an ostrich. There you go. Or a vulture. Amar of Shezbi. Okay, what did he say? Ochal Ever Minachai Mimena. Eino Sofeg Arbaim. You don't have Malkos of Arbaim. The ein shchita mitaharta, and shchita doesn't help. This is very, very cryptic. Let's review 2 parts of the Mishnah. The first is that Ever Minachai of this non-kosher animal, enos sofeg harbaim. Why not? Right? Both a member of Gidol Amara, both according to the Yidden. I mean, maybe some of the Yidden would hold that there's, so you can say it's not Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lazar because they hold that it's true by atomic. So maybe this is like Rav Meir, maybe this is like the Chachamim. So that's part one. And ve'ein shchita mitaharta, and the shchita doesn't help. Says the Gemara b'mai. What exactly are we talking about? Which type of person are we talking about? Ilema be Israel. If you want to say that we're talking about a yid, pshita de'ein shchita mitaharta. The case was with a non-kosher bird. So what do you mean that shchita is mitaharta, right? The second part of this Mishnah cannot be talking about a yid because the bird we're talking about is an ostrich, a bat, whatever, vulture. All of these birds are not kosher bichlal. So of course, ein shchita mitaharta. Elalav, it must be that when it says ein shchita mitaharta, what is it talking about? B'nei Noach. And what iser do B'nei Noach have when it comes to food? Only Ever Minachai, Michlal de Aser, which implies that shchita is not the matir for Ever Minachai. This we've discussed before. One of the unique distinctions between Jews and B'nei Noach when it comes to Ever Minachai is what is considered the moment of death. According to the Jews, Shteit Chumash Devarim Perek Yud Beis, the definition of the death of the animal, at which point the Isser of Eber Minachai disappears, is Shchita. But according to a Goy who holds that there is no din of Shchita, what is the Matir? When does the Isser of Eber Minachai dissolve? Only when Pirchus stops. So because the Gemara says it ain't Shchita mitaharta by a non-kosher bird, what does that show us? That shows us that there still is something usher for that Goy. What is the one thing that's usher for that Goy? Ever Minachai. So that's what the Gemara is saying over here, that Afananami Tanina. It's like the Brisa before it, and this is what the Gemara is indicating to us. Rav Mani Bar Patish, Rami Resha Asefa. Rav Rami Bar Patish felt that there was a significant conflict between the Resha and the Seifa. The Resha said that you don't get Malkos, which is difficult to understand. What do you mean you don't get Malkos? We just said that a guy does get Malkos for eating Ever Minachai from a non-kosher bird. And the Seifa, we said, was what's going on here? The Resha and the Seifa just don't stim so well. So he just framed the question differently. Umashani Resha be Israel v'Seifa b'ben Noach. Oh, now let's look back up at this Afon Anami Tanina, this Mishnah from Taras Perak Aleph. Let's look at it again. Ochal Ever Minachai mimena eno sofeg arbaim. Why would it be that for a Jew you don't get Malkos? Because either you hold like the Chachamim or you hold like Rav Meir. If you hold like the Chachamim or you hold like Rav Meir, a Yid doesn't have the Isser of Ever Minachai by animals that are Tameh. So, Eno Sofek Esarbaim, you have no Isser of Ever Minachai. However, the Seifa of the Mishnah in Taros, over there we would say that taka is talking about a Goy, the Seifa b'ben Noach. All right, now let's get into a complex sugya about the shiur of Ever Minachai. Omar Rav, and if you look on the side over here, it could be Rabbi Yehuda Omar Rav. Same source, but it is important to know who said what. So Omar Rav, Ever Minachai tzarich kazayis, that when we talk about the Isra of Ever Minachai, and we're 5 lines from the bottom on Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, we need to in order to violate the Isra of Ever Minachai, the shiur of the Isra is a kazayis. My taima, because achila ksibe, we have the language of achila by the Isra of Ever Minachai. This is Dvarim Yud Beis, Pasuk Kav Gimel. The Pasuk reads, Rak chazak levilti achol hadam, ki adam hu hanefesh, v'lo sochal hanefesh ima basar. And we see the word achol, the Gemara says achila ksiva be. The word achila is not the word that's in the Pasuk. That isn't the conjugation of the word that we see, but rather it is the word achol. So therefore, because we have a language of achila, very halachic answer. Because we have the language of achila, whenever we talk about achila, that means that there's a shiur. What's the shiur? It's a kazayis. Says the Gemara, not so fast. Masiv Rav Amram, ochal Ever min hachai mimena, eno sofeg es harbaim vein shchita mitaharta. This is exactly the Mishnah that we saw a minute ago. Now we're bringing it against our approach of the Gemara in the name of Rav that Ever min hachai needs a kazayis. V'isal kadaita ba'inun kezayis. If you want to say that there is a shiur of a kezayis, tepukle de ka'achal kezayis, then we should then assume, in fact, that you ate a kezayis. And if, in fact, you ate a kezayis, why would we say eno sophegus harbaim? As you'll recall, we said, according to Rav Moni Bar Putish, 6 lines from the bottom, that part of the Mishnah from Taros is talking about a Jew. It's fine. Maybe you don't have the Isser of Aver Minachai, but you do have some kind of Isser. So why is it that Achal Aver Minachai Mimena in a Sofeg Etzarbaim? If you want to say that the Yisrael doesn't have the Isser of Aver Minachai because you hold like the Chachamim or of Meir, and because you hold like the Chachamim or of Meir, there is no Aver Minachai for a year by that which is Tameh, fine. But what do you mean in a Sofeg Etzarbaim? You ate a Tameh bird. So whether or not you hold like like Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yehuda on the one hand, or Rabbi Meir on the other, or whatever, you still should be chayiv. So that's right. So tepuk leitukachal kazayis. Says the Gemara, what you did in this case, what the Yisrael did in this case from the Mishnah in Taras when he ate this piece of non-kosher bird was keda'amar Rav Nachman b'mashu basar gidin ve'atzamos. He had a small amount of basar, but the rest of what he ate, what created the volume of a kizayis of food, was gidin ve'atzamos. So let's say that I have 1.1 of a kizayis. 0.3 was flesh. 0.3 was atzamos, and the rest was gidin. So what have I eaten of the animal? 0.3 of flesh. The rest is ein begidin b'nosein tam, ein ba'atzamos b'nosein tam. You're not a good Jew, but you're not going to be chayiv for eating the basar tmeya, the of tmeya, if what you ate was only partially meat. We do not measure in the kezayis of achilas iser of a tameh bird. I'm not talking about Eivir min achai right now, but we do not measure in the iser of eating a non-kosher animal the bones. When I was a little kid, I watched my grandfather crack the bones open and get the marrow out. Like I didn't want to waste one good hard-earned American penny. That's not if that animal was not kosher, that wouldn't count as the shiur. So now when we look back at the Mishnah from Taros, we can understand why it is that he was Eino Sofeg Esharbaim. Pashut, you weren't going to be chayiv in Eivir min achai, because according to the approach of the Chachamim and Rav Meir, Eivir min achai only applies to animals that are tar. What about the non-kosher status? Yeah, but most of that kazayis was atzamos, even if any of it was. If the achila of basar was less than a kazayis, Hachanami, says the Gemara, b'mashu basar gidin ve'atzamos. So asked and answered, that was one of the questions that we tried to pose against Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, who said that Eivir min achai needs a kezayis. That still remains true. Last few words on the page on Kuf Beis Amid Aleph Tashma. Let's try again. To Amar Rav, Rav says, as we turn to the top of Kuf Beis Amid Beis, Achal tzipor tahora b'chayeha. If you eat a bird that is tahor while it's alive, namely the Isser of Eivir min achai, b'kol shehu. Very interesting language. Rashi, b'chayeha b'kol shehu, mishum Eivir min achai, alma lo ba'inan be kezayis. It should be a kasha on the approach of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, who says that when it comes to Eivir min achai, the shiur of achila applies, the shiur of a kezayis applies to the Isser. This Gemara continues, this statement of Rab, b'misasa, when the animal dies, and we're no longer dealing with Eivir min achai. What are we dealing with now? Rashi, b'misasa b'kezayis, de benevela achila ksiva, v'chol achila b'kezayis, bar mi Eivir min achai, de Rabbi Yekra v'kapira Eivir l'chudei. So the Gemara says, of course you should be chayiv on a kezayis. Utmeya, let's say third version. If we had an animal that's tmeya, forget about Eivir min achai, and forget about nevela. The animal was a camel. So the Gemara says, Bein bechayeha, bein b'misasa b'kolshu. Difficult, really hard piece of Gemara. What are you talking about? The shiur are so odd. Says the Gemara, Hachanami, here too, what do we mean? When do we say that you're chayiv an aver min achai, but you didn't yet eat a kazayas of the food. What a fascinating thing. By aver min achai, we do add in the aver itself, including the bones and the sinews. When we talk about aver min achai, hachanami b'mashu basar gidin ba'atzamos. Listen to this distinction. Let's say I have the polka of an animal. I tore the polka off the animal while it was alive. Classic aver min achai. I cook it. I don't eat raw food. I'm not crazy. I cook it and I eat it. And I eat the whole thing. Now, when it comes to the flesh that was on the bone, a little tiny polka didn't have a kazayas of flesh. It had 0.5 of a kazayas of flesh. But I ate the bone and I ate the gidin. The total volume of what I ate, meat, bones, sinews, 1.001, whatever. I'm above the threshold of a kazayas. Violated the Yisur of Aver min achai. Did I eat a kazayas of an animal that's tameh as it relates to eating a tameh animal? No. Because there we have ein begidin b'no sein tam. But you can't say that when we're talking about Aver min achai. Aver min achai, the Aver, the limb, is itself usher, including the bones. So that's the distinction that we say here. So let's try question number 3. We're 4 lines down on Kuf Beis and Beis. We're going to be stopping about 12 lines from the bottom in Amar of Yochanan. The Gemara says as follows, question 3 on Rav. Let's review. Rav said that when it comes to Aver min achai, the threshold of Isser is a kazayas. Toshma, we have a Tosefta that says the following. Natal tzipor she'ein bo kazayas ve'achlo. I take a bird and I eat it live. I eat it aver min achai. So Rebbe Poter, Rebbe says you didn't, I mean, you're definitely not normal, but you didn't violate the Isser of aver min achai. And Rebbe Lazar bar Reb Shimon machayev. So says the Gemara, Amar Rebbe Lazar bar Shimon kal v'chomer al aver mimena chayev al kula lokol shegin. You obviously you're going to be chayiv here. He doesn't understand Rebbe at all. Now, this is all still part of the Tosefta. Chanka, if the animal was strangled and killed, now things change. What happens when something is dead? Now we're not talking about Aver min achai anymore. We're talking about Nevela. Ve'achla divrei hakol begazayis. So let's pick apart the lumdus of Rebbe on the one hand, who paters the eating of a tzipor that doesn't have a kazayas, and Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon who holds it your chayiv. Ad kan lo pligi el demar savar bechayeha le'evarim omedes. That when an animal is alive, we view it as though it's already in its aver state, and therefore whatever you eat would be aver min achai. Umar savar, according to Rebbe, the first shita is Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon. The second shita, Umar savar bechayeha lav le'evarim omedes. Rebbe has a very unique shita. It might be that the animal is not kosher and you're chayiv for that. But if you eat a whole animal, you just put the whole thing in your mouth and you manage to swallow it. The halacha is that you have not violated aver min achai because you ate it whole. That whole animal doesn't have a din of aver. Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon definitely holds that way. Look at his kal v'chomer, that if we say al aver mimena chayav al kula lo kol sheken, Rebbe doesn't agree to the kal v'chomer fundamentally because he says that v'chayeha lav le'evar momedes. When the animal's alive, it's not viewed aver. It's viewed as one whole entity. If you eat the whole thing, you didn't eat aver min achai. Aver min achai doesn't mean that you ate it before it was shechted. It means you ate literally an aver of a chai. And because bechayeha lav le'ivar momedes, he therefore holds that you're pater. Again, you're chayiv on other things potentially if the animal was a treifa, whatever the details are. Tekule al mamiha. However, everyone seems to agree, both Rebbe and Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon, that lo ba'inan kizayis, because if you look on the 4th line of Kuf Beis and Beis, what does it say? Natal tzipor she'ein bo kizayis. Now, everyone agrees that that was not talking about a kazais. And while Rebbe was poter, he was poter on a technicality that you ate the animal whole. And Rebbe Lazar Shimon said you're chayiv. So clearly he doesn't hold that you need a kazais. Amar Rav Nachman, b'mashehu basar gidim ve'atzamos. What we mean when we say that this animal didn't have a kazais is that it didn't have a kazais of flesh. But it did have a kazais if you add in flesh, bone, and sinew. Asks the Gemara, Umi ikamidi, Could there be a bird? Dibikule lesbe kazayas basar. The whole bird doesn't have a kazayas of flesh. But uvachad ever is kizayis b'mashu basar gidin v'atzamos. Could there be such an odd bird? It's a bird that the flesh of the bird in aggregate is not kizayis, but in one limb of the bird there is a kizayis with the minimal amount of flesh plus bone plus sinew. Amar of Shravya, there is such a bird like that. And that's what's called the kalnisa. The kalnisa, I don't know exactly what kind of bird it is. Does the art scroll translate a kalnisa? I have no idea. Rashi over here says about the kalnisa, Rashi is 3/4 of the way down. Of kachush me'od. It's an extremely lean bird. There's no fat on it. Does a lot of flying. Most birds are not fat. So the Gemara over here says the bird was super, super lean, very thin amount of flesh, but there, when you add it all together, there was a limb of that bird that was a kizayis. So says the Gemara, wait 1 second, it can't be the kalnisa. It can't be the kalnisa. Why not? Because everyone agrees that if it was chan kava achla and you killed it and now it's nevela, that it's kizayis. Wait, v'hakalnisa of tamehu v'amar Rab tmeya bein b'chayeh bein b'misah b'mashu. The line at the top of the page, the second line of this page on Kuf Beis and Amud Beis, was part of Rav's comment. And if this animal was a kalnisa, then it's tmeya. And if it's tmeya, then kizayis is the wrong shiur. So the Gemara says, you're right. Ella ke'ein kalnisa. It was an animal that was similar to the kalnisa, but not the kalnisa, which was tmeya. It was a kosher bird that was just like the kalnisa, in as much as it was extremely lean. But there was still one limb that if you would have eaten that one limb, you would have had a mashahu of basar, and coupled with coupled with the atzamos and the gidin, there was still a kizayis. Now let's dig in a level deeper in regards to the machlokas between Rebbe and Rebbe Lazar, Reb Shimon, about bechayeha le'evar momedes or bechayeha lav le'evar momedes. And let's review. Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon held that an animal was bechayeha while it was alive. It was viewed as though it was already cut into eighths. And according to Rebbe, he did not feel that way. So the Gemara says halfway down, Amar Rava, Im Tim Salomar Savar Rebbe Machshavas Ochlin Shma Machshava. If according to Rebbe in general, that he would say that your machshava matters in regards to food. So while Rebbe in general holds that Bechayeha lav le'evar momed, that's that if I look at an animal, I don't view it piecemeal. Fine, but what if chishev la'ochla ever, and then va'ochla kula chayev? He would have to say that you're chayev. If Rebbe holds that your machshava matters, then he can go against what he normally holds, which is that an animal that's whole, bechayeha, we don't look at it aver, but if I overlay my machshava on top of that, then we would say taka that you're chayev if you ate the whole animal. It would change the sugya. Omer le Abaye, umi ikamidi di ilu achile acher lo mechayev achile hai mechayev. Could it be, let's say, within Rebbe's camp, that according to Rebbe, if I have a machshava that this animal bechayeha is aver, even though fundamentally Rebbe holds not that way, can my machshava impact the psak? And the Gemara says that if that's true, then we could have two yidden who are both talmidim of Rebbe, one of whom eats the bird, he's going to be pater because he holds like Rebbe. The other one had a machshava that overlaid the shita that bechayeha. We don't say it's bechayeha lav le'evar momedes, and by him it's so you can have two Jews. Says the Gemara, Amar le zelefi machshavtov, zelefi machshavtov, no problem at all. And what about the reverse? Says the Gemara, V'Amar Rava imtim salomar savar Rebbe Lazar b'Reb Shimon machshavas ochlin shma machshava. If Rebbe Lazar b'Reb Shimon, who was of the opinion that the animal was aver while it was still alive, so then if chishev la'ochla meisava ochla chaya pater. If my intention was only to eat it when it died, and therefore we don't view it as aver, so then you should be pater. So says the Gemara, same question as we asked on Rebbe. Amar le Abaye, umi ikamidi ilu achile acher mechayev achile hai pater. Says the Gemara, how could it be that within one sheet of Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon you can have two talmidim who do the same maisa, one's chayev and one's pater? Says the Gemara, of course you can have that because your machshava matters when it comes to food. If I have a machshava that I'm only going to eat the animal once it's killed, that means I'm not viewing it as aver. I'm viewing it the way Rebbe views it. So your machshava can overlay the fundamental view of whether or not Rebbe and Rebbe Lazar, Reb Shimon hold that b'chayeha, whether or not its avarim are considered to be one or they're considered to be separate. So it says the Gemara, yeah, Amar le zelfi machshavto, zelfi machshavto, no problem at all. There's such an interesting thing where we allow our machshava to impact the Isser, because let's say I really have a Yetzer Hara for Aver Min Achai, and I hold like Rebbe, and I hold like Rebbe Lazar, Reb Shimon. All I have to do is change my mindset. You know what? My intent is not to eat this while it's alive. Now, this probably wouldn't work out in Psak, but it is seemingly the lumdus. We're going to stop right here at Amar of Yochanan. Emir Tashem will pick up tomorrow night, starting right here, 12 lines or so from the bottom of the Beis and the days. Wishing you all a beautiful night.